Between October 1977 and February 1978 in Los Angeles, California, 10 women were raped, murdered, and dumped along the hillsides of Northeast LA. The first couple of victims were sex workers, but it wasn't until the deaths of 5 girls, some as young as 12, who were abducted from middle-class neighborhoods, that the media began to report on it heavily. 10 women murdered in just 4 months, a brand new serial killer became apparent, and the nickname the Hillside Strangler was given to him. Further investigation and forensic examinations into the positioning of the bodies, marked by the absence of drag marks or scratches, heightened suspicions regarding the potential involvement of 2 killers instead of 1. Welcome to How to Deal. This video is part of our famous serial killer series, and if you enjoy true crime, real crime, or stories where the murderer might have had mental health issues, please like the vid, sub to the page, and share the link to help us continue to grow. Now let's begin. Kenneth Bianchi was born on May 22, 1951 in Rochester, New York. His mother was just 17 years old, an alcoholic, and a prostitute. She gave him up for adoption 2 weeks after he was born. He was adopted by his aunt, Frances Bianchi, and her husband, Nicholas. Kenneth was described as a compulsive liar from the time he could talk. He would often fall into inattentive daydreams, where his eyes would roll back into his head. A physician diagnosed a 5-year-old Kenneth with petit mal seizures. He was also taken frequently to the doctors because of an involuntary urination problem at night, causing him a great deal of humiliation. He was prone to fits of anger, having many behavioral problems as a child. His adoptive mother took him to a psychiatrist multiple times, with Kenneth being diagnosed with passive-aggressive personality disorder at the age of 10. After his adoptive father passed away from pneumonia in 1964, the teenage Kenneth refused to cry or show any other emotions. He spent most of his time home alone, while recently widowed Frances would work. Nonetheless, he graduated high school and even joined a motorcycle gang. As an adult, Kenneth wanted to become a cop and even enrolled in college to study police science and psychology, but dropped out after just 1 semester. He wound up moving to Los Angeles in 1975 and started spending time with his older cousin, Angelo Bono. Angelo Bono was born on October 5, 1934, also in Rochester. He was born to first-generation Italian immigrants from San Bono. At the age of 5, his parents got divorced and his mother moved her kids to California. He would shout at his mother and even call her names like whore to her face, but still had an emotional connection with her. He was a big hit with the ladies and was married several times, even having multiple children. All his wives were treated horribly and abused in unspeakable manners. He was no honorable father either. Angelo had built an extensive criminal history, ranging from grand theft auto, failure to pay child support, assault, and even rape. His proclaimed hero and role model was the notorious criminal Carol Chessman, who would often impersonate an officer himself. By 1975, Angelo had built himself a reasonable reputation as an auto upholsterer. He even owned his own shop. He had no use for employees, so the place gave him privacy to do any horrible things he wanted. Later that year, his younger cousin Kenneth Bianchi came from New York to stay with Angelo. Kenneth was very impressed with Angelo's lifestyle: gold chains around his neck, rings on his fingers, silk clothes, and his way with women, how he would put them in their place. Angelo showed Kenneth how to get any whore for free, simply by flashing a badge at the end of intercourse. Wasn't long before they came up with the idea of getting some girls to work for them as prostitutes. 2 teenage runaways, Sabra Hannon and Becky Spears, met the cousins, and once under their control, were forced to prostitute themselves. Eventually, they both escaped. The cousins would drive around in an old police car they bought at an auction, and used fake badges to persuade women into their vehicle. 2 sex workers sold them a trick list with the names of some men who frequented prostitutes. When Angelo and Kenneth found that they was deceived, they went out looking for them. They caught up with a 19-year-old Yolanda Washington, one of the 2 women. She had been beaten, raped, and strangled to death. Her naked body had been cleaned before dumped and positioned in a lewd manner on a hillside near the Ventura Highway. Faint rope marks were visible around her neck, wrists, and ankle. This was the cousins' first murder. A couple of weeks later, Angelo and Kenneth went on a stroll again in their unmarked vehicle. They approached 15-year-old Judy Miller, a high school dropout and part-time sex worker, under false pretenses. They claimed to be undercover cops and handcuffed her, shoving her into the car. They took her to Angelo's auto upholstery shop, where they sodomized, strangled, and murdered her. On November 1st, 1977, her naked body was found on a lawn just north of downtown LA. On the 5th of November, feeling untouchable, they go on the prowl again, this time looking for a woman who wasn't a sex worker. 21-year-old Lisa Caston was pulled over while driving home from a shift as a waitress. The cousins present her with fake badges, arrest her, and took her away. Her nude body was found by a country club in Glendale, California. She was also strangled and raped. The next 2 were the Hillside Stranglers' youngest victims, at ages 14 and 12. The 2 friends was kidnapped and found a week later, already decomposing by a garbage pile near Dodger Stadium. Earlier that same day, hikers found the naked body of a 20-year-old Christina Weckler with the same neck, wrist, and ankle ligature marks. Later, it was determined that Windex had been injected into her neck to torture her, and her cause of death was due to inhaling lethal gas from an oven. Jane King had been missing since November 9. The aspiring actress was found weeks later on November 29. It was almost impossible to tell if she had been raped or tortured due to the severity of the decomposition, but it was strongly suspected that she had been strangled to death. With each murder, the Hillside Stranglers tried new ways to torture their victims. 18-year-old Lauren Wagner was pulled over by the cousins. She refused to get out of the car at first, but was still handcuffed and abducted by the Stranglers. The next morning, her nude body was found by a hillside around Mount Washington. With burn marks on her hands, it was indicated that she was tortured by electrocution. Also, the marks around her wrists suggested Lauren was handcuffed before being strangled to death. At this time, investigators came to the conclusion that the perpetrator might have been a police officer or a person pretending to be one. After word of an 8th victim was out, the press spread the word and also dubbed the murderer the Hillside Strangler, suspecting that it was just one perpetrator. But a crucial piece of information was given to the detectives by a neighbor who seen Lauren Wagner get arrested, and that was that it was 2 men, even describing details of the abductors. Women were cautioned to double-check the police officers if pulled over by law enforcement. Weeks after the media circus, the cousins were working on switching tactics. On December 14, Kenneth called an escort service and gave the address of a vacant house on his block. 17-year-old Kimberly Martin was dispatched and arrived at the house, where she was kidnapped and taken to the auto shop, where she was raped, tortured, and murdered. Her naked body had been dumped over the side of a hill in the Silver Lake neighborhood, with the media picking this one up as well, reporting that the Hillside Strangler had struck again, claiming their 9th victim. After laying low for about 2 months, Cindy Lee entered Angelo's upholstery shop on February 16, 1978 to discuss work to be performed on her car. That's when Kenneth shows up and have a private discussion with Angelo to claim her as their next victim. Her body was stuffed into the back of her own car, driven up to a high area in Los Angeles, and pushed down a hill. Her car was discovered the next day, with her body in the trunk showing some signs of the same ligature marks on a corpse that was tortured and raped. Kenneth Bianchi was going around bragging about the murders, even going on ride-alongs with officers and asking questions on what they knew. This was worrying the older cousin Angelo Bono. He wound up kicking Kenneth out the house, separating the murderous duo. In May 1978, Kenneth moved to Washington State and worked as a security guard. On January 11, 1979, Kenneth offered to pay 2 university students, a 22-year-old Karen Mandick and a 27-year-old Diane Wilder, $100 to house sit one of the properties he was guarding. He proceeds to shove them down the stairs into the basement, strangles them, and murders them. The next day, the bodies were found nearby in the trunk of a car. Without his partner's help, Kenneth left many clues and police apprehended him the next day. His address on his ID was an LA address and close to the scene of where Lauren Wagner was murdered. This was the connection the police needed to catch these serial killers. While questioning Kenneth, he was admitting to having a split personality that was committing the murders and not him, trying to go for an insanity case. When this was disproven by a psychiatrist, Kenneth started confessing to having help from someone else, his own cousin, Angelo Bono. Police and forensics teams searched Angelo's home and shop and discovered white polyester fiber on Judy's eyelid that matched the upholstery material in Angelo's workshop, and another fiber that was found under Wagner's fingernail. Kenneth pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder and sentenced to life. Angelo went to trial and at the time was the longest trial in US criminal history, lasting more than 2 years. He was found guilty of 9 murders and sentenced to life as well. Angelo died in prison on September 21, 2002 at the age of 67 due to a heart attack. Kenneth is eligible for parole in 2025. Welcome to our channel, where we delve into 2 fascinating and thought-provoking topics: mental health and the chilling world of serial killers. Here, we aim to create a safe and supportive space for individuals looking to dive into the captivating world of serial killers while examining their motives and psychology. We strongly believe that education and awareness can play a crucial role in mental health support and crime prevention. Together we can learn how to deal.